Hey everybody, welcome to the Abbots Address. It's Friday, July 3rd, 2015. So when the Buddha teaches us about suffering and talks about dukkha and talks about, tries to help with this whole business of the human experience and why we suffer, the linchpin that holds the whole thing together, and this is what we find in the second noble truth where it's articulated. He said, there's suffering, and really in that first noble truth of suffering, you can click on that, and there's a whole bunch of elucidations about that. What suffering is, what the kinds of suffering are, there's tons of them. Okay, to be associated with people or things or situations or events you don't want to be associated with, to not be close to people or things or situations you want to be close to, the impermanence of loss, of connection, on and on, a ton of things. And so usually what we do, though, is we think about this whole thing in terms of, okay, to stop suffering, I've got to accumulate the right kind of lifestyle or the right kind of experiences, and they can help. But what really helps is seeing what's the root that holds that whole, what's the thing that holds the whole story in place, so to speak. And in the second noble truth, we come across this teaching about the source or the origin of the suffering. That there's a reason for it, and it's not just because shit happens. There's a really specific reality that gets observed. And in the beginning, we don't really know that this is the case in our own experience because we haven't seen it necessarily yet. But it has to do with craving. It has to do with obsession and addiction, desire, okay? Now, it's kind of a funny thing because, like in America, basically what we've got is an institutionalized greed, the hoped for of an enlightened self-interest and this kind of thing. If you contrast that to a sort of a government-run, top-down thing, well, I think we've got a better deal. We've got more freedoms to explore things and so on. But really, the root of all this is not going to be solved by getting the right stuff or acquiring the right things. It really has to do with seeing the nature of the mind itself and how the mind is actually, how the narrative is kind of held together, you see. And so the second noble truth, the sort of source, the origin of suffering, in traditional Buddhist teaching, strictly speaking, we say that there's three. There's three origins of this. The first is craving for sensual or sense pleasures. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is a craving for existence. And the third thing is a craving for non-existence. Okay, and that might seem a little obtuse in the beginning, but it's in there. The first one, craving for sense pleasures, it's worth going in there a little bit. If you think about the Heart Sutra, we have eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, right? And there's a reason why those things get elucidated. It's because the eye and the object of sight and the consciousness, when those three things meet, then we have this experience of seeing. See, and that might, okay, so what? The eye sees, yes, very nice, but it's an important thing to realize that the eye has its own realm, I guess, the realm of sight, the realm of visual objects. And within that realm of eye and subjective sight and consciousness, the thing that holds it together is this craving. So the eye so to speak, naturally is drawn towards things that it finds pleasurable and is repulsed by things that it finds repulsive. Okay? And so, okay, so what? Well, part of the so what here, a big part of the so what, is that it's the play of that craving and desire. In this example, we're talking about eye or sight. It's in this constant play of looking for pleasurable things and trying to avoid displeasurable things. It's part of the play of that dance that keeps us pulling a narrative through. It's it is the foundational way that the eye sense is used to keep us keep I there, to keep the self there, to keep me firmly in the center of my equation and my experience. There's me. And one of the big ways that that works is that the I, consciously or unconsciously, is constantly in this game of pleasure seeking, of grasping, of finding things attractive and finding things aversive, and how do we work this out, see? So it's hunting all the time. And in this hunting for pleasurable things to see and avoiding negative things to see, this sense of self is assured and is buffered up and is made solid. And it's the same thing with sounds, see? So the realm of the ear, you could say, this is another realm. This is another kind of bandwidth or a territory of experience. And within it, there's the ear, there's the organ of perception, there's the sound that's perceived, and then there's the consciousness that, and when those three things are there, boom, there's the experience. And the same thing with the ear, right? We are drawn to pleasurable sounds and we're repulsed by sounds we don't find attractive, normatively speaking. And so there's, again, another whole framework that's over here that's buffing up this idea of, this experience, rather, of me and what I like. Same with smell, taste, touch, objects of physical experience, skin. The skin has its own craving and has its own compulsion and has its own obsession. The body, and also in this is mind and objects of mental formation. So why am I talking about all this stuff? Well, I'm talking about all this stuff because there's a lot of folks that are asking me that we're starting to get in the real work here about how do I actually shift from just maybe using mindfulness practice or something to have a little bit of a nicer day and be more productive at work or whatever, to actually breaking through into liberation, breaking through into awakening. What does this awakening thing have to do with? Well, part of it is seeing the mechanism by which our foolishness is perpetuated. See? And so when we go into our zazen, when you learn the skill of actually just being still and letting the mind become concentrated without purposefully, setting forth to investigate these various areas in any kind of an analytical way at the outset, it's not necessary. But when you just sit and pay attention, we have the opportunity to start to notice in much, much more refined ways what's actually going on. And so the practice is a direct expression of true nature. It's a direct expression of true nature. It's exactly what it is. And it's also a sacred space, so to say, that's mundane, but it's a sacred space wherein we're able to actually see how the mind works in a radically different way. And this isn't just like a psychological model of moving from unhealth to more normal social norm or anything like that. It's not a therapeutic technique. It's actually seeing how our human experience happens. And the big the big issue here is how we unknowingly project our ill-informed view onto all of reality, and we just sort of put it all over everything. And that's the gap between what actually is true reality and how we're living. And the space between those is the friction, and that friction is the suffering. See? So let's not think about meditation, mindfulness, even Zen practice, for goodness sake, as some kind of a way to add a happier moment or something like that. I mean, that's okay, but go for the real thing here. The real thing is awakening. It's really awakening to our true nature. And it's not just because it's a nice thing to do. It's because actually, when we realize the danger that the eye is seeking pleasure for the eye and the ear is seeking pleasure for the ear and everything like this, and when that just runs amok and we don't understand what's going on, if we really understand the danger of it, it would be like suddenly realizing that your head is on fire. And it's like, oh shit, my head's on fire. It's kind of like that. When I realized how I was playing into this game, and it still happens sometimes. It's astonishing the vigor with which this foolishness insists upon being. And so all of this is just, I guess, it's just an exhortation to, at a certain level, to enjoy things in life is fantastic. When we read about the Buddha teaching householders, he didn't say anything other than there's a pleasure of enjoying things that you've righteously earned and are moral and upright and good, and you should enjoy them. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not talking about disconnecting. I mean, for God's sake, I'm a musician, right? So I mean, I'm all about shaping pleasing sounds and sounds that express what I want to be expressed, and that's what I do as a musician. So it's not about suddenly unplugging from life and just living in a closet or something, but it's about unhooking the very structure of the suffering that is just so rampant. So let's take it up together. When you sit, when you pay attention, when you really are sitting now, don't just go into a kind of a foggy, kind of a zone out thing. It won't help. The foggy, thick, black, nothing is not what we're trying to do. See, stay awake, stay alert, tune into what's going on. When you're sitting there watching the breath, if that's what your practice is, whole body, whole mind, whole heart, whole soul, whole everything. The whole universe becomes this breath. And pay attention to it as though you were watching the birth of your child, or you were, grasping life, or you just be there, pay attention, don't check out, don't go to sleep. And for God's sake, don't turn it into some kind of a mindful add-on. Let's do the real thing, do the real work. Okay, thank you for everybody. Sorry for the rant, but I hope it's a useful one. Okay, we'll see you in the meditation hall.